Good day. Hello again. I'm Irons and today I'm back with the part three, which is the publishing a course book, The Rule of Feedback by Doria Aziz Singapore. Voila. And this is the last part. So, developing instructional materials like a coursebook is a complex multi-stage process involving different stakeholders, each having distinct rules and levels of influence. According to Richard and Rogers, learning a language teaching approach into an effective methodology requires designing an instructional system that considers the syllabus, learners' rules, teachers' rules, and types and function of materials. This means that syllabus, designers, teachers, and learners are all vital sources of feedback for materials development. However, Jolly and Valetu note that materials development is not a simple linear process. Instead, it should include feedback loops and optional pathways that make the system dynamic and self-regulating, allowing to continuous evaluation and improvement. In practice, though, the process can become imbalanced when a central authority such as a government or curriculum board has control over both the syllabus and the approval of teaching materials. In such cases, the authority can exert strong influence over what materials look like and contains, while feedback from teachers or learners may be ignored, making the influence one directional. Overall, the chapter stresses the effective feedback integration from all stakeholders is key to producing responsive, high quality educational materials that truly reflect both curriculum goals and learners' needs. So now we have the nature of pathways and loops in materials development. So the chapter builds on Jolly and Bolito's ideas of optional pathways and feedback loops in materials development, emphasizing that this must be intentionally structured into the process to keep it dynamic and self-regulating. Rather than limiting feedback to teachers and learners after classroom use, the chapter argues for a macro-level system where multiple stakeholders, including curriculum developers, ministries of education, textbook writers, publishers, and decision-making maker can provide input throughout the development. Abu Shama also points out a lack of open communication between curriculum planners and textbook writers. To address this, the chapter stresses the need for continuous dialogues between curriculum developers, materials writers, and teachers. This dialogue helps materials respond to diverse classroom needs and levels. This chapter suggests creating ongoing dialogue between curriculum developers who design what students should learn, material textbook writers who create the actual learning content, and teachers who use the materials in real classroom. In short, open and continuous communication helps make educational materials more practical, inclusive, and effective. According also to Richard and Rudger, instructional materials must reflect decisions about their purpose, form, form relationship to other inputs, and the teacher's role. This means that materials must align with syllabus goals, teachers' abilities, learners' needs, and the classroom context. So this emphasizes that instructional materials are not neutral. They need to be intentionally designed to fit into larger teaching and learning system. Instructional materials should be aligned with curriculum and syllabus goals, what teacher can realistically do, what learners need and can handle, the actual learning or the actual classroom environment. Good materials aren't just well designed, they also practical, purposeful, and context aware. However, the influence of stakeholders varies. Masuhara notes that commercial materials often remove teachers from decision making, leaving control with publishers. In contrast, some systems like Singapore's Ministry of Education maintain control over curriculum design and goals. This statement highlights how different stakeholders such as the teacher, the publisher, or government bodies, have varying levels of influence on educational materials depending on the systems. Hopkins also warns that coursebook cannot force top-down change. We must respect teachers' realities, gradually introduce innovation, and be grounded in classroom practice. Yalden similarly emphasizes consultation at all levels during material design. Canningsworth also highlights that materials also carry a hidden curriculum, unspoken social and cultural values that shape learners' attitude. Therefore, materials must be evaluated not just for language content, but also for the ideological message they convey. This statement by Canningsworth points out that teaching materials are not neutral. They often include implicit social and cultural values which can influence learners in subtle but powerful ways. He also reminds us that teaching material can influence learning through both what they can say and what they imply. So materials must be critically evaluated for ideological biases, cultural representation, and social messages, not just their linguistic content. And now let's move on to the existence of feedback loops in material development. So this chapter explores the critical role of feedback loops, especially from teachers and learners in the development evaluation and revision of instructional materials for language education, drawing on case studies from Philippines, India, Singapore, and other contexts. It shows that material development is not a one-time learner process but rather a cyclical system where feedback informs continual improvement. First, we have the teacher and end user feedback as central. So Gonzalez emphasizes that Filipino teachers and language specialists are best positioned to judge what materials suit local learners. The usability of materials in real classrooms become the ultimate measures of success. Field testing and teacher feedback are now integral in Philippines materials development, ensuring that materials are both contextually reliable and pedagogically effective. So, according to Gonzalez, um, we teachers from Philippines are experts because we play a central role in deciding which materials work best for Filipino students. He or she also stresses that teachers' feedback and classroom testing are essential for creating effective and meaningful educational materials in the Philippines. Second, we have the institutionalized trialing and validation. So Pacasio and Villamin describe structured feedback system, multiple trialing stages, and evaluation phases, where teachers and students test, critique, and refine materials before publication. Similarly, TICO in India recounts multi-stage feedback involving teachers, peers, and classroom testing, leading to significant revisions in structure, cultural content, ideology. So this explains that trialing and validation or the process of testing and improving learning materials has become a formal and organized part of materials development. This section also shows that in both the Philippines and India, creating effective learning materials involve formal step-by-step testing and feedback. Teachers and students actively participate in shaping the materials, ensuring they are accurate, culturally appropriate, and truly useful before being officially published or distributed. Next, we also have the global and commercial perspective. In global publishing context, piloting and focus group are used to align materials with teachers and learners' needs. However, Amrani notes that piloting is becoming rare due to its cost and complexity, with publishers relying more on focus group or consultant feedback. In global publishing, feedback is still important, but practical and financial limits have changed how it's gathered. While piloting used to be the best way to test material directly in classroom, many publishers now use cheaper and faster methods like focus group and expert reviews to make sure their material still meets the needs of teachers and students worldwide. we have the challenges and power dynamics and feedback. So Tomlinson and Gower and Gill highlights conflict among stakeholder publishers, writers, reviewers, and teachers. While feedback is crucial, it raises difficult questions. Whose feedback is most credible and representative? At what stage should it be collected and how should it be implemented? How do commercial pressures shape what feedback upon? Tomlinson points out that writers' principle may clash with publishers' market goals, and that power relations often determine how much teacher and learner feedback truly influences the final product. Fifth, we have the feedback as continuous and dynamic loop. Across studies, effective materials development is seen as iterative, involving first, initial consultation with teachers and students. Second, drafting and piloting in real classroom. Third, revision based on user reaction. Fourth, further field testing and refinement. Okay, so this explains that feedback in materials development should be continuous, not just a one-time process. It describes a cycle or loop where materials are constantly improved feedback. So developing good learning materials is such a never-ending cycle of testing or feedback and improvement. Teachers and students play an active role throughout the processes. And even after publication, materials should keep changing to stay relevant, to stay effective, and to stay alive. And last, we have the tensions and reflections. So while feedback improves quality and relevance, its validity and interpretation are not always straightforward. Teachers may focus on classroom usability over deeper pedagogical concerns, and positive feedback may be biased. Additionally, ideological influences, national agendas, educational reforms, or economic motives often shape how feedback is used. This discusses the challenges and complexities that come with using feedback in material development. While feedback is valuable, it's not always perfect or objective. Although feedback is essential in creating better teaching materials, it must be used carefully and critically. Not all feedback is equally valid or unbiased, and sometimes broader political or economical pressures influence how it's used. Developers must balance practical classroom input with deeper educational and ethical consideration. And now let's move on to the case of the Singapore or the case of Singapore. In response to the demands of knowledge-based economy, Singapore redefined the role of education in the mid 1990s, focusing on ensuring its curriculum remained relevant, innovative, and future-oriented. This led to major reforms initiated by the Ministry of Education, including a shift in curriculum design and instructional materials development. So, the Singapore case illustrates a hybrid model of curriculum innovation, decentralized production within a centralized system of regulation. By outsourcing textbook creation, Singapore encouraged competition and creativity in the education publishing industry, aligning with the global trends in public-private collaboration. This approach aimed to produce more engaging, more varied, and market-responsive materials for learning. However, the centralized oversight ensured that national educational goals, cultural values, and standards were not compromised. This balance reflects Singapore's broader philosophy of controlled flexibility, promoting innovation while maintaining systematic coherence. So this model also underscores key tension in materials development. So it highlights the tensions or the opposing forces that often exist in the process of developing educational materials. This tension shows that while certain goals are desirable, they can sometimes conflict with one another. So let's break each down. First, we have the autonomy versus accountability. Publishers had freedom to innovate but were bounded by MOS approval mechanism. It means that publishers and writers have the freedom to be creative and develop new or innovative materials. However, accountability, however, means they must also follow government rules and standards, such as set by the Ministry of Education. The tension here is that while publishers want to design fresh, engaging materials, their creative freedom is limited by the need of the um, approval of the Ministry of Education. But before they can use the material that can be used in school. Next, we also have the diversity versus uniformity. So, diversity allows schools to choose from different textbook or learning resources, giving teachers a flexibility to pick what best fits their students. Uniformity, on the other hand, ensures that all materials still follow one national syllabus or standard so that students across the country learn the same core content. So the tension arises because while variety encourages adaptability and innovation, too much freedom might lead to inconsistencies in what students learn. The challenge here is to balance variety with consistency. Next, we also have the efficiency versus creativity. So, efficiency refers to having structured review scheduled, a systematic process for checking, for approving, and updating materials on time. Creativity, on the other hand, involves allowing developers and teachers to experiment, to adapt, and respond quickly to new classroom needs or teaching ideas. The tension here is that are rigid because review system can make the process efficient and controlled, but it may also limit creativity and slow down innovation or responsiveness. In conclusion, the model shows that in material development, there's always a balancing act. Publishers and educators must find ways to be creative but responsible, offer variety but maintain standard, and stay efficient without stifling innovation. These tensions are natural but must be managed carefully to produce both effective and flexible learning materials. So now let's move on to developing the conceptual framework and sample units. So this chapter highlights a dynamic and participatory model of materials developing in Singapore, balancing institutional regulation with agencies. First, we have the teacher participation as central to innovation. So the use of surveys and focus group exemplifies collaborative curriculum design alignment with the Nesbit's assertion that teachers' insights yield real solutions to real problems. Teachers did not just review materials, they actively shape them, ensuring that the final product addresses both pedagogical aims and practical classroom needs. So teachers play the key and active role in creating the materials. Their real classroom experience helped them ensure that curriculum was not only educationally strong but also practical and effective for everyday teaching. So this approach values teachers as partners in innovation, not just users of ready-made materials. Next, we have the navigating dual accountability. So materials developers face a dual challenges. First, the satisfying the MOS policy-driven requirements while meeting teachers' expectation for usable, exam-focused, and the contextually relevant materials. The team's approach demonstrates the negotiation between top-down policy and bottom-up classroom realities. So this explains that materials developers had to carefully balance two different sets of expectations, those coming from the government or the top down, and those from the teachers in the classroom bottom up or the bottom up. Developers had to bridge the gap between government expectation and classroom realities. They worked to make materials that were officially approved but still practically policy aligned but teachers friendly, showing how successful materials development often requires negotiation and compromise between different stakeholders. Third or next, we have the compromise and creativity under constraints. So the project reveals the economic and logistical limitation of educational publishing. Budget caps and rise price restriction limited production quality and manpower, forcing the team to prioritize what mattered most. Coherence, conceptual relevance, and teacher appeal over ideal resource allocation. So this highlights how materials developers had to be creative despite limited resources. It also shows that even though the project faced financial and logistical constraints, the team found ways to produce effective materials by focusing on what was most important. Fourth, we have the cultural and ideological awareness. The revisions made after focus group feedback, such as incorporating local text and avoiding Eurocentric content, reflect growing sensitivity to cultural representation and the hidden curriculum. This demonstrates that materials development is not merely technical but also ideological and ethical. So this explains that developing educational materials involve more than just writing lessons or designing activities. It also includes being culturally sensitive and ethically aware of what messages the materials convey. This means that creating a textbook isn't only about good teaching techniques. It's also about respecting culture and fairness. By including local content and avoiding cultural biases, developers make materials that are not only effective for learners, but also socially responsible, inclusive, and empowering for students. And lastly, we have the feedback as ongoing loop, not a final step. The process exemplifies cyclical development, where feedback was continually integrated into revision. This made the materials development process responsive, reflective, and evidence-based qualities essential to sustainable innovation. This explains that feedback in materials development should be continuous, not just something done at the end. It also describes a cyclical or repeating processes where developers constantly use feedback to improve and refine materials. This means that developing good learning materials is a continuous process of testing, revising, and improving. Feedback isn't the final. Feedback is not the final step. It's part of ongoing cycle of learning and growth. This approach keeps materials relevant, reflective, effective, and innovative over time. The development of conceptual framework and sample units for the secondary English course in Singapore illustrates a consultative and context-sensitive approach to materials design. The process also balanced the institutional expectation, the teacher's need, and cultural authenticity, creating a model that was both innovative and grounded in classroom realities. Ultimately, this stage exemplifies how feedback loops and participatory planning can turn syllabus goals into usable, relevant instructional materials, ensuring that innovation in curriculum is both top-down guided and bottom-up informed. And now let's move on to developing the support material. So this stage emphasized the importance of planning, review, and evaluation timelines carefully. As noted by IBA, project planners must ensure that evaluation results are obtained quickly enough to inform decisions, while also allowing enough time to integrate feedback and revisions into the next draft or proof of the materials. In other words, the process of developing support materials required both efficiency and flexibility, balancing speed with the need for meaningful improvement based on feedback. So this explains that in developing educational materials, the timing of review and evaluation is very, very important. It highlights the need to plan carefully so that feedback can actually be used to improve the materials effectively. So this stage shows that this stage shows that developing educational material is not just about collecting feedback. It's about timing. It's about timing. It, it's about timing it well. Developers need to get evaluation results soon enough to be useful, but also leave enough time to apply them properly. The goal is to balance speed and quality, ensuring that each new version of the materials is well improved and responsive to users' needs. So first, we have the support materials as integral, not peripheral. So the inclusion of teachers, guides, and IT resources recognizes that effective materials development does not end with the learner's textbook. Teachers need scaffolding, guidance, and adaptable tools to implement the new syllabus effectively. These materials serve to translate syllabus intentions into classroom practice, bridging the gap between design and delivery. So the development of support materials marks a critical extension of the textbook project, highlighting the comprehensive and systemic nature of the instructional design in Singapore curriculum reform. So this explains that support materials like pictures, guides, and digital resources are not just extra or optional add-ons. They are essential parts of an effective learning package. This means that creating a textbook alone is not enough. To make sure the new syllabus truly in classroom, developers must also provide teachers, guides, and digital resources. These support materials help teachers understand, adapt, and effectively deliver the lessons, making them a core part of successful curriculum implementing, not just extras. Second, we have the importance of timely review and feedback integration. The reference to the IDE underscore a key principle in materials development. Feedback must be actionable and timely. A review process that is too slow risks making evaluation irrelevant, while a rush process may overlook important improvements. This balance between reflection reflection ensures that revisions are both strategic and responsive. So this means that getting feedback fast is important, but using it wisely is even more important. Developers need to move quickly enough to keep materials relevant, but also take enough time to change thoughtful, meaningful changes. This balance ensures that every revision truly improves the quality and usefulness of the materials. Third, we have the emergence of technology in curriculum design. The mention of IT resources indicates Singapore's early move toward digital integration in education, aligning with its national vision of becoming a knowledge-based economy. Incorporating IT into instructional packages reflects forward-thinking efforts to modernize pedagogy and prepare both teachers and students for a digitally oriented learning environment. Sorry. So this explains how technology began to play a role in curriculum design, using Singapore as an example of a country that integrated digital tools early on. This means also that including IT resources in the curriculum marks Singapore's forward looking step toward digital education. It wasn't just about adding computers, it was about modernizing teaching, supporting national development goals, and preparing both teachers and students for a future where technology and learning go hand in hand. Fourth, we have the feedback loops as continuous mechanism. As in earlier stages of development, this phase reaffirms that evaluation is a cyclical, not a one-time step. Each round of reviews, including that for our support materials, feeds directly into the refinement of the next version. This reinforces a feedback-driven iterative model of materials design. This means that feedback in materials development should be continuous and repetitive, forming a cycle rather than a one-time event. It also means that developing teaching materials is a never-ending cycle of improvement. Never-ending cycle of improvement. After each review, the materials are revised, tested again, ensuring that every version becomes better than the last. Feedback isn't the end of the process. It what drives the process forward and keeps materials effective and relevant. And now let's move on to piloting. So the piloting phase of the Eureka materials demonstrates an essential step in ensuring practical validation and real-world relevance of curriculum materials. Although modest in scope, this phase embodies key lessons about implementation and evaluation in educational innovation. So first, we have the piloting as a bridge between design and practice. So the decision to pilot, even while awaiting MOE approval, reflects a proactive approach to curriculum development. So piloting allows developers to see how theoretical frameworks function in authentic classroom context, revealing whether activities, pacing, and content truly meet learners' needs. This helps bridge the gap between design intent and the classroom reality. This highlights how piloting plays a crucial role in connecting curriculum design with real classroom practice. Piloting acts as a test run that helps developers check if their ideas really work in the classroom. It connects planning and reality, ensuring that materials are not just well designed on paper, but also effective and realistic for teachers and learning. Second is the challenges of curriculum transition. So the pilot occurred during a curriculum shift, requiring teachers to navigate between old and new systems. This illustrates a broader challenge in education reform. Innovation must align with teachers' existing workload and curricular commitment. Without clear alignment or sufficient preparation time, even well-designed materials may face resistance or implementation difficulties. This explains that the difficulties teachers face during times of curriculum change, especially when new materials or teaching methods are introduced. This also means that when a new curriculum is introduced, teachers face real challenges adjusting to change. Why? Because even the best materials won't work well if teachers are overworked, confused by shifting expectation, or not given enough preparation time. Successful innovation requires both good design and practical teacher support. Next, we have the limitations in observation and data collection. Since publishers were not allowed to observe lessons, feedback had to rely on teachers' reports rather than direct observations. This limited the depth of evaluative insight as thousands in classroom interaction, student engagement, and teacher adaptation could not be fully captured. Nonetheless, even the indirect feedback was valuable in identifying areas for teacher support and resource improvement. This means that limitation and consequences of not being able to directly observe classroom during the pilot or the evaluation phase of materials development. Since the developers could not watch the lessons themselves, they had to depend on the teacher's feedback instead of direct observation. This made it harder to fully understand how the material worked in real classrooms, but the feedback still help improve teacher support and make the material better overall. Last is the feedback as forward momentum. So the team acknowledged that while major content changes could not be made immediately, the pilot's finding would inform the development of supplementary materials and teacher training. This reflects a growth-oriented feedback mindset where even limited trials contribute to long-term refinement. This highlights how feedback, even if it can't lead to instant changes, still plays a vital role in ongoing improvement. The team couldn't make a big changes to the materials right away, but they still used what they learned from the pilot to improve future resources and teacher training. This shows a positive attitude toward feedback, treating it not as a criticism but as a step forward for continuous improvement. In conclusion, the piloting phase, though constrained by the time, logistic, and observation restriction, played a crucial role in testing the feasibility and classroom fit of the new English materials. It underscores the importance of teacher adaptability, timely support resources, and structured feedback loops in successful materials implementation. Ultimately, this phase highlights that piloting is not merely a trial but a formative step in the materials development cycle, one that transforms design into practice and sets the foundation for continuous improvement and teacher readiness and curriculum innovation. And now let's move on to the approval and publication. So this stage reflects the culmination of the materials development processes, where the work of design, feedback, and piloting transition into official validation and publication. It underscores the balance between creative authorship and institutional oversight in educational publishing. First, we have the institutional gatekeeping and quality assurance. So the CPD's role, or the Curriculum Planning and Development Division, in granting provisional and final approval underscore its function as the quality control mechanism in Singapore curriculum system. The multi-stage approval process ensures that materials are not only pedagogically, pedagogically sound, but also aligned with national educational objective, reinforcing coherence across schools. So this explains how the CPD acts as gatescape and quality controller in Singapore education system. The CPD also acts like a quality filter for school materials in Singapore. It reviews and approves textbooks and resources in stage to make sure they are well designed, effective for learning, and aligned with national goals. This process keeps education high quality and consistent across all schools. Second, we have the collaboration and constructive revision. The Eureka team's engagement with curriculum specialists demonstrate a collaborative partnership between publishers and the MOE. Rather than a one-way evaluation, this process functioned as a dialogue where institutional reviewers provided specific actionable feedback and developers were expected to make precise revisions. Such collaboration ensures both academic rigor and classroom practicality. So, this explains how Eureka Textbook Team and the Ministry of Education work together through a collaborative and constructive feedback. The Eureka team and the MOE work together in a constructive partnership. Instead of being reviewed and corrected, the developers receive useful detailed feedback and revise the materials accordingly. This teamwork helped create textbooks that were both high quality and effective for real classroom use. Third, we have the refinement as a core principle of development. The requirement for changes even after years of planning, piloting, and feedback illustrates that materials development is iterative, not linear. Revisions to instructional designs and content language show how continuous fine-tuning leads to greater clarity, inclusivity, and pedagogical strength. This passage explains that refinement or continuous improvement is a central part of developing effective learning materials. Even after years of work, the materials still needed change, showing that developing textbooks is an ongoing process. Each round of revisions makes the materials clearer, fairer, and more effective for teaching and learning. Continuous refinement is what turns good materials into excellent ones. And lastly, we have the balancing innovation and compliance. The Eureka project had to negotiate innovation within boundaries. While aiming for creativity and modern pedagogy, developers also needed to comply with the MOS standard, cultural sensitives, and language policies. This tension between innovation and regulation is defining features of educational publishing in centralized systems like Singapore. So, this explains the challenges of balancing creativity and control in curriculum development, especially in systems where education is tightly regulated. The Eureka team wanted to create new and creative teaching materials, but also we had to follow the MOS strict rules about content, about the culture, and about the language. This balancing act, being innovative but still following the rules, is a normal challenge in education systems like Singapore's, where the government closely oversees what goes into to schools. So, in conclusion, the approval and publication phase of the Eureka materials represent the final validation of complex multi-year development processes that combine innovation, consultation, and compliance. The CPD's provisional approval reflected confidence in materials quality, while the mandatory revision ensured alignment with curricular and linguistic standards. Ultimately, this stage demonstrates that in Singapore's education system, curricular materials succeed through collaboration, through continuous refinement, and through institutional accountability, ensuring that what reaches the classroom is both pedagogically robust and contextually appropriate for national use. And now let's move on to the feedback from the piloting exercise. So during the piloting phase, the development team maintained communication with the five schools participating in the trial of the Eureka materials. However, response rates varied only three schools. Returned the pilot feedback forms by late June to early July. One provided verbal feedback, and one did not respond at all. Despite the limited numbers of formal responses, the team carefully analyzed the feedback received and drew several key conclusions. First, we have the feedback on coursebook and worksheets. So, teachers offered valuable insights regarding the text, task, design, and layout. However, since the materials for that level were already finalized, this suggestion could not be implemented immediately but would inform the development of subsequent levels. This explains how teachers' feedback helped improve future materials, even though it couldn't be applied right away. Teachers give helpful suggestions about how to improve the lessons and worksheets. The team couldn't change the materials right away because they were already finished, but they used the feedback to make the next level better. This shows how feedback can still help materials evolve and improve over time. Second, we have the feedback on the teacher's notes. Comments from teachers using Unit 6 were instrumental in improving in the teacher's edition for the rest of the course. So it highlights how teachers' feedback directly improved the teacher's guide for the course. Teacher who used Unit 6 gave helpful comments about the teacher's notes. Their suggestion helped the developers make the teacher's guide for the other units clearer, more practical, and more effective for classroom use. Third, we have the feedback on the CDROM. Teachers noted that interface and opening screens were not user-friendly and that text display too small when projected. These design elements were stated for redesign and enlargement to enhance classroom usability. Teacher feedback to lead improvements in the design and usability of the CD-ROM or CD-ROM component of the course materials. Teachers found that it hard to use, the controls weren't clear, the text was too small when shown on the screen. The team decided to redesign and enlarge the text and layout so it would be easier for teacher and student to see and use the class. In conclusion, for the feedback of the piloting exercises, the feedback from the piloting exercises, though limited in quantity, was qualitatively rich and instrumental in shaping the ongoing development of the Eureka materials. It provided practical classroom-based insight and informed improvements in future course levels, teachers' guides, and digital resources. This phase reinforced a key principle in materials development. Effective innovation depends on sustained feedback loops even when implementing an implementation constraint limit immediate changes. And now let's move on to the role and effectiveness of feedback in that study. So this section highlights both the potential value and practical challenges of feedback in large-scale educational materials development. So first we have the limitation of piloting as feedback tool. So the study underscore a core but issue raised by Vail and Gower. Feedback from piloting is rarely definitive. Because of multiple uncontrolled variables, it is difficult to isolate which aspect of the material's success or succeed or failed. So it explains that piloting, while valuable, has limitations as a source of reliable feedback in materials development. Piloting helps test new materials in a real classroom, but the results are not always reliable because every teacher and class is different. In Eureka project, feedback from teachers was useful but not fully accurate since they used different methods and only tested part of the materials. This shows that piloting gives helpful clues but not final answer about how effective the materials really are. Next, we have the credibility and context of feedback. As Tomlinson observed, the credibility of feedback providers is crucial. Teachers unfamiliar with the new syllabus could not fully evaluate how well the materials aligned with the intended curriculum. Their insights, while valuable, were interpretive rather than evaluative, revealing how new content might be received in practice rather than how effective it might curriculum goals. So this highlights that not all feedback carries the same weight or accuracy, depending on who gives it and their level of understanding of the curriculum. Um, Tomlinson also reminds us that good feedback depends on who gives it. In the Eureka project, some teachers were not yet familiar with the new syllabus, so they couldn't fully judge if the materials met the curriculum goals. Their comments were still useful, showing how lesson might work in real classroom, but they reflected personal impressions, not a complete evaluation of how well the materials fit the new curriculum. Third, we have the feedback as balancing act between policy, cost, and time. So Donovan's view that piloting's benefit outweigh the inconveniences applies here, but with an important case feedback processes are resources intensive. The case illustrates the tension between educational thoroughness, the gathering and integrating detailed feedback, and commercial or policy deadlines, meeting ministry approval schedule. This balance is especially difficult in hybrid systems where ministries centralize approval but decentralize development. It explains that feedback, while valuable, comes with practical challenges, especially when educational project must balance quality, cost, and time constraints. So Donovan says piloting is valuable despite being time consuming, but the Eureka case shows why it's challenging. Gathering feedback improves materials but also costs time and money. Developers had to balance doing a thorough job with the meeting government deadlines and staying within budget. This balance is tricky in systems where the government approves materials but private publisher creates them. Fourth, we have the editorial mediation of feedback. So the final phase where editors had to make changes themselves shows how feedback can shift from collaborative to editorial decision making under pressure. While this ensures timely completion, it also risks diluting the writer's pedagogical intent. Nevertheless, it reflects a pragmatic reality of publishing within bureaucratic, timeless, responsive, must often be tempered by feasibility. This point explains how, in the final stage of the process of handling feedback become more centralized and controlled by editors rather than being a fully collaborative effort between writers, teachers, and reviewers. In the final stage, the editors also had to handle most of the revision themselves to meet to meet deadlines. This was farther this was faster but less collaborative, meaning some of the writers' original teaching ideas might have been wicked. Still, this shows the reality of working under government and publishing time pressures. Sometimes you must trade a bit of idealism for practicality. In conclusion, for the role and effectiveness of feedback in case study, the Eureka case revealed that feedback, though indispensable, functions within constraint of time, cost, and institutional structure. Piloting and formal reviews provided valuable direction, but their effectiveness was limited by contextual factors such as teacher readiness, incomplete materials, and title lies. Ultimately, the case affirms that feedback is most effective when planned systematically, with clear rules, adequate training for feedback providers, and sufficient time to integrate revision. In this instance, feedback played a formative role guiding future development and ensuring compliance with approval standards, but it also exposed the fragile balance between educational quality and production efficiency in coursebook publishing. And now let's move on to incorporating feedback loops in the material development process. So this section reinforces a systemic and collaborative view of materials development, presenting feedback loops not as optional add-ons, but as integral components of quality assurance. First, we have the feedback as cyclical, not linear process. So the discussion reframes materials development as a continuous iterative cycle, drafting, testing, revising, and refining rather than a one-time production process. This explain this highlights that developing educational materials is not a one-way process, but a continuous cycle of improvement based on feedback and real classroom use. Developing learning materials isn't a one-time task. It's a repeating cycle of creating, testing, and improving. Feedback must real classroom help make material more practical and effective. But since publishers must meet deadlines, it's hard to keep revising without delay. So developers must balance educational quality with efficiency to keep material both useful and timely. Second, we have the collaboration among key stakeholders. So the section underscored the effective feedback depends on partnership among teachers, ministries, and publishers. Government involvement helps institutionalize review mechanism, while teachers bring classroom level insight that ensure materials are pedagogically relevant and contextually grounded. So it emphasizes that successful materials development relies on teamwork among all major players in education. Um, government agencies, and publishers. Each group contributes a different kind of expertise, and real improvement happens only when they work together. For feedback to improve learning materials, teachers, the government, the publisher must work together. The government provides structure and standards. Teacher share what works in their classroom, and publisher use this information to make better materials. This process works best when everyone trusts one another and shares the same goal, creating effective, relevant, and high quality educational resources. Third is the teacher empowerment and professionalization. Teachers are positioned not merely as users but as co-developers of materials. Their feedback gains significance when they are trained, informed, and motivated. This implies a professional development dimension. Teachers must stay updated on curriculum shifts and teaching innovations to give valid, insightful feedback. So, this highlights that teachers play an active professional role in materials development, not just as end user, but as essential contributors to the creation and improvement of learning resources. Teachers aren't just users of textbooks. They also help create them. But for their feedback to matter, teachers need training and support to understand new teaching methods and curriculum changes. When ministries and publishers invest in teachers' development and involve them in decision, teachers become more confident, motivated, and effective partners in improving education. Fourth, we have the balancing pedagogical and commercial interests. The text presents a pragmatic yet ethical challenge for publishers, balancing profit motives with educational responsibility. While incorporating feedback loops, add costs and delays, it enhances credibility, users, trust, and long-term profitability. As Yo notes, the business justification for such investment depends on publishers' visions and values, whether it prioritizes quick returns or sustainable educational impact. This point discusses the tension between the educational quality and business reality in publishing. showing that developing good learning material is not just a pedagogical task but also a commercial. Publisher must balance making money with doing what's best for education. Getting teacher feedback and testing materials costs time and money, but it also improves quality and builds trust. Yo says whether publisher choose quick profit or long-term impact depends on their value. The best one sees feedback as an investment in better learning and stronger credibility. And lastly, we have the institutionalizing feedback for sustainable development. Finally, the passage calls for institutional mechanism, structured timelines, budget allocation, and documentation for review and feedback. This ensures that feedback is not an afterthought but an embedded practice in curriculum planning and publishing. This point emphasizes that feedback should be permanent, organized, or part of materials development, not something done only occasionally or informally. This point says feedback should be permanent and organized part of materials development. Schools and publishers should plan review schedules, set aside funds, and record all feedback carefully. Doing this makes sure that improving materials isn't just a one-time effort, but an ongoing sustainable process that keeps education relevant and effective. For conclusion, and incorporating feedback loops in the materials development process, development transformed the process from a static product-oriented model into dynamic participatory system. Success depends on collaboration, planning, and long-term investment among ministries, publishers, teachers, and curriculum development. While feedback mechanism constrain schedules and budgets, their educational and reputational value for outweighs the cost. When systematically planned, feedback loops can the feedback loops makes material more responsive, effective, credible, ensuring that it truly meets the needs of both teachers and learners. And for the conclusion of the publishing a course book, The Rule of Feedback by Doria Aziz Kapurwala. Um, the chapter final message is a call for integration, dialogue, and realism in materials development. The process must recognize the interdependence of actors and the complex sequence of reform, balancing visionary planning with practical classroom realities. To ensure sustainable and effective educational materials, systems must be designed with feedback, consultation, and iteration at their core. Only through such an inclusive and reflective approach can materials truly meet the evolving needs of teachers, learners, and educational systems in a rapidly changing world. That's all. That's all, and thank you. So again, I am Arian Anduyo. And this is the last part of the discussion. Thank you, goodbye, and God bless.